Hello everybody, Maven here, and unless you're living under a rock, you saw the new artifact mods coming in Act 3 that Bungie revealed in the recent TWID. Auto rifles are getting extremely juiced up, so that begs the question, what is the best auto rifle in the game? Well, today we're going to put the top options to the test and get our answer. Fun fact, near the start of the final shape, I was planning on doing a video of the Necrochasm versus the Kvostov, but I'm glad I waited, because now every auto rifle is a potential contender, so let's break it down. Hope you enjoy. So let's start by breaking down the new artifact mods coming in a couple days. We got Overload Auto Rifle, pretty typical, but here's where things start to get interesting. We got Sustained Fire, which says that continuously damaging enemies with an auto rifle grants you damage resistance. Obviously, we don't know how much damage resistance, but my guess is somewhere between 15 and 30%, but we'll find out at reset. And the next artifact mod that really juices up auto rifles is Targeting Auto Loader, which says that defeating enemies with an auto rifle will reload your equipped weapon and increase its damage, bonus progress when surrounded. But once again, we don't know the degree of the benefits gained, but because the second half says bonus progress while surrounded, that makes me think that it's a stack system, such as the Sniper's Meditation mod we have right now. Hits with a sniper will grant a stacking damage bonus, stacks up to 5 times. So I'm guessing that Targeting Autoloader is going to be a similar stack system. But the part that has me wondering the most is the part that says defeating combatants with an auto rifle reloads it. Now, will it fully reload it, or will it just be like subsistence? My guess is that it will fully reload it just based on how it's worded. Either way, it's kind of insane, and this will definitely put auto rifles on the radar for the remainder of the season. So we're gonna put the best of the best auto rifles to the test to figure out which one will dominate starting in a couple days. Obviously, we can't test these new artifact mods right now, but you can just put 2 and 2 together and assume that the best auto today will be the best auto with the new mods. But here are the best auto rifles that we'll be testing out in this video, and as you can see, a majority of them are exotic, because if you think about it, auto rifles are ad clear weapons, and since exotic primaries do 30% more damage to minors than non-exotics, it's safe to say that exotic auto rifles are going to be the best by default. But for those who wanted to run a non-exotic auto rifle, I did include what I believe to be the best in slot, legendary, and kinetic auto rifles. So we're going to conduct our first test here in the orrery because there's a good balance of ad clear, range, and majors. And we're going to start off with the Monte Carlo. This weapon obviously fills a melee build niche, but if that's what your build is, then this thing is going to be cracked. Maybe don't use the glaive mode like I did in this clip just for show, but I will say that when you proc Markov Chain, this thing does slap, I'll admit. Markov Chain is basically just Swashbuckler. You get a stack for killing a target, but a melee kill will instantly grant 5 stacks, which is the max, and grants 33% damage. And if you're using this thing on a solar or prismatic build where your melees will also grant you Radiant, and assuming you're running heavy-handed with surges, you can instantly give your Monte Carlo Radiant and surges at the same time, making it basically into a machine gun. Given the right circumstances, the Monte Carlo can really put in the work, but on its own, it's kind of just an auto rifle. That's sort of the only way to describe it. It's just a gun, a 600 RPM auto. So like I said, it's meant for niche melee builds, but as a weapon, it doesn't really do a whole lot. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this is not the best auto in the game, so moving on. Next up, we got the Quicksilver Storm, and for those confused why I'm using it without the catalyst, it's just because I prefer it this way. Now, I can justify the catalyst this season because of the Threaded Blast artifact mod, but in general, I prefer it without the catalyst. Why, you might ask? Well, because the catalyst turns it from a kinetic weapon into a strand weapon. And for those who didn't know, kinetic primaries do 10% more damage to unshielded enemies than non-kinetics do. And every bit of damage matters on an ad clear weapon, so I'll take that extra 10%. Now, there was a time when Quicksilver Storm was one of the top 5 weapons in the game easily, and it was in the season where we had anti-barrier auto rifle. Everyone was using Quicksilver Storm and Grandmaster Nightfalls, but unfortunately, the mighty has fallen. This thing is not what it used to be, trust me. Bungie has issued multiple nerfs to this thing, and in my opinion, it's not good anymore. They slowed the rate at which nanotech tracer rockets spawn in, which are the things that charge the grenade shots when they connect with a target. Speaking of which, they also heavily nerfed the damage that the grenade shots do, and I'll show you what I mean in our next test against Carl coming up after the orrery comparison is over. But my TLDR for this thing is that it sucks now, but that's just my opinion. If you love it, more power to you. And now we come to the Cerberus +1. Now this thing just got a huge buff in the final shape. Its focus fire catalyst was so terrible horrible that it actually hurt the gun in my opinion. Before the final shape, I actually ran the Cerberus without the catalyst equipped because it was so bad that if you accidentally activated it, it was an inconvenience because it slowed your rate of fire and just did nothing beneficial. It was embarrassing. But now what it does is that you can hold reload to activate focus fire after getting a kill, which will then just straight up boost your damage by a whopping 50% for 8 seconds, which refreshes on final blows. It's absolutely absurd. And as you can see in the background gameplay, when we come up to those yellow bars, it absolutely melts them. I really wish I could say that this is the best auto in the game, but in my opinion, it's just not because it lacks range. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the hidden perks of the Cerberus is that it has infinite range, but the shot spread makes it so you obviously won't hit all your pellets from anywhere outside of like 10 meters. So the Cerberus makes you adopt this almost shotgun-like playstyle, which makes me die more than usual. It's a high-risk, high-reward weapon. But where I think this weapon will really shine is on Devour builds. If you have Devour going, then yeah, I want to say this thing will absolutely be the best auto rifle in the game for your build, especially with the new targeting autoloader mod. I'm excited to try that out. But now let's move on to everyone's favorite, the Sweet Bus. Now, the Sweet Bus has always been a weapon that's only really been viable on Actium War Rig Titan because it gives you like a 700 round magazine. But now, because of the targeting autoloader mod, refilling our magazine on final blows, this thing is going to be viable on every character, and that's pretty exciting. I love this weapon. I think it's excellent. It hits like a truck and it has a lot of nice utility after the function they gave it a couple seasons ago where every 10th shot will be an explosive round. That just straight up adds free DPS to this thing, even though it already hit like a truck. And as you can see, when we come up to the yellow bars, we absolutely smelt them. Maybe not as hard as the Cerberus, but we can melt them at about 10 times the range than the Cerberus can. The main strong suit of the Sweet Bus, in my opinion, is the range. Those explosive rounds give it pseudo-infinite range, but also out of every auto rifle in the game, this one feels the easiest to control at super far ranges. You can map enemies with this thing. I've used it in multiple different Grandmaster Nightfalls before and found it extremely easy to land my shots in scout rifle range. Seriously, this thing barely moves. So out of all auto rifles, Sweet Business has the best balance of range and damage, but what it lacks is ad clear. Now, yes, it can shred ads, and you can spray around the ground at clusters of mobs and let the explosive rounds do the work, but the Sweet Bus doesn't actually have a true dedicated ad clear perk, and for the most part, you're just moving around from target to target manually, which does slow its pace in some situations. Most of the time, that won't matter, and you'll still have a solid auto that shines in other areas, but it's still something worth considering. So this is a high contender, but my gut says it's not the best auto in the game. So next, let's move on to the Kvastov. And after the Kvastov, I'm going to show you the Necrochasm, and you'll see why I was going to do a video of Kvastov versus Necrochasm. These two autos are really competing for the same role, and to this day, I still cannot fully determine which one is better. Anyways, in the background gameplay, I'm using Kinetic Siphon and getting a double kill and picking up the orb with Shoot to Loot and just going to town. And when you have that Eyes Up Guardian procced, it's absolutely disgusting with the ad clear. You can just hip fire a couple shots and those bullets will jump around doing heavy damage to everything in the area and just shred the vicinity apart. Anything in a 10-meter radius of what you just shot gets disintegrated in a couple shots by those ricochets. And not to mention, it looks, feels, and sounds amazing when that happens. And one of the benefits of the Kvastov is the way you use it is quite contrary to every other auto rifle in the game. You see, with the typical auto, you want to delete the trash mobs before you start shooting the majors. But with the Kvastov, you can just focus on those majors and the ricochet shots will deal with the trash mobs for you. So this may be a stretch, but legitimately, if you think about it, this is kind of a massive damage buff compared to the other autos because you can get a clean head start on dealing with the majors, whereas every other auto is still busy dealing with those trash mobs first. But with the Kvastov, those mobs are just going to be gone without you even having to look at them. And that's what makes the Kvastov an absolute top contender to be the best auto rifle in the entire game. But let's hold that note for a second and move on to the Necrochasm, which I feel is the Kvastov's arch nemesis because they're very similar. Now, in the final shape, the Necrochasm got a massive buff by receiving its new catalyst, One for Thrall, which is basically the same thing as One for All, except better. One for All is activated by hitting 3 separate targets within a few seconds of each other, which gives you a 35% damage buff for 10 seconds. One for Thrall does the same thing, except that timer extends on final blows, so you can keep that damage buff up forever as long as you keep shooting things. It's absolutely incredible if I do say so myself. And I know I said the Kvastov's Eyes of Guardian perk looked, felt, and sounded amazing, but that's nothing compared to the Necrochasm's Cursed Thrall explosions that happen when you get a precision final blow. The Necrochasm's Cursed Thrall explosion is the most insane chaining explosion effect that has ever existed in the history of Destiny 2. When this thing pops off amidst a group of ads, the collateral damage is ridiculous. Anything within 10 meters of that ad is lucky if it survives, but the best part is that if a nearby ad dies to that Cursed Thrall explosion, they cause an additional Cursed Thrall explosion that can continue to chain over a massive radius. And if a major happens to be amidst all the chaos, they will suffer multiple explosions and will also have a DOT effect applied to them. And when an enemy is touched by a Cursed Thrall DOT, they essentially will be marked. And if they die within the next few seconds while that DOT is ticking, precision kill or not, they will cause a Cursed Thrall explosion upon death. And just as icing on the cake, you also proc Desperation, which increases your RPM to 900, in addition to that 1 for Thrall damage, so your Necrochasm is cooking. Now, what is keeping me from immediately ending the video and calling the Necrochasm the best auto rifle in the game? Well, Desperation does require a precision kill, which in some situations isn't the easiest thing to do for a rapid fire frame auto to achieve. And there can be some hectic situations where you're praying for a precision kill, and if you accidentally hit a body shot kill, it could screw you over and you could die for it. On the other hand, the Kvastov doesn't have that problem. You'll still get periodic ricochets, precision or not. So the Kvastov is a lot more forgiving and user-friendly, not to mention rangier. So let's hold this thought for a bit and move on to our final exotic auto rifle, the Tommy's Matchbook. And as you can see, I went on solar so I can get restoration with the healing grenade and extend that restoration with Ember of Empyrean by getting solar weapon final blows. And if you're going to use the Tommy's Matchbook, you have to go on solar to do this, otherwise it's not really viable because you're going to be dying. And another benefit of going solar is that you can take advantage of Ember of Ashes to cause more solar ignitions. Speaking of which, we also got that new Solar Fulmination artifact mod that increases the damage of solar ignitions. So these things combined absolutely makes the Tommy's Matchbook a beast. Now, it may not have an ad clear perk, but when it comes to damage output when utilized on a solar build like this, it is actually the highest DPS auto rifle in the game. And as you saw in the background gameplay, we ignited and shredded those yellow bars so stupidly fast that this was the only run through where the second wave of yellow harpies didn't spawn because I killed the boss too fast. I said earlier that the Cerberus is the best auto in the game if you're on a Devour build, but if you're on a solar build or a Precious Scars build on Prismatic with the Solar Super, the Tommy's is undoubtedly the best and strongest auto in the game, hands down. Now, I already gave you my opinions on the best legendary autos in the game, and I'm only going to showcase them here briefly and then move on to the next test with the exotics only. But the best in slot legendary energy auto is the No Hesitation. I'm not too big a fan of this thing, but it's the best on paper. Support frames are the most DPS out of any frame of auto, and also its physic perk gives you and your allies restoration ×2 when you hip fire at them, which is exotic levels of broken. Like I said, I'm not a fan of this auto. I don't like its slow tracking bullets, but factually, this is the best energy auto. For me personally though, I think the Prosecutor is the best with Dragonfly Volt Shot, but that's just false because the No Hesitation is basically an exotic. And for the best legendary kinetic slot auto, that would go to the Rufus's Fury. And my personal god roll is rewind rounds with Paracausal Affinity. I have a pendant mag and an adept backup mag on mine, so it holds 72 rounds in the magazine, and you pair that with rewind rounds, and this thing's mag size is absolutely insane. It seriously feels like it has a 160 round magazine. Pair that with the constant 20% damage buff from Paracausal Affinity, and this thing feels so incredible. You can see in the background gameplay that when we come up to those yellow bars that our mag size is gigantic, and you pair that with the new artifact mod and you're never gonna have to reload. It's by far my favorite legendary auto, and you don't even need to be on a strand build for it to be insane, but if you are, that's just icing on the cake. Now we're about to move on to our next test, which is the Carl damage comparisons, but I want to preface it by saying that I know all my gameplay takes weren't perfect. Obviously, we didn't hit 100% crits, but I feel like it's actually better when it's a little scuffed because it's more realistic, you know? And here's where we get to the massive downside of the Kvastov and Necrochasm. While they do an outstanding job at ad clear, they really kind of suck at damaging fatter targets. And I even got a couple Cursed Thrall explosions on Carl, and I had 1 for Thrall with Desperation, and while it did beat out the Kvastov, it was still pretty dang slow. And Eyes of Guardian does not buff your Kvastov single target damage, and it just kind of feels like shooting him with a regular auto rifle. So the upside is the broken ad clear, the downside is the lackluster DPS. There has to be a trade-off. But now let's move on to our real heavy hitters, the Tommy's Matchbook, the Quicksilver Storm, the Cerberus +1, and the Sweet Bus. And right away you can see what I mean about the Quicksilver's grenade launcher mode. They hit like pebbles now, whereas before they hit like rockets. The nerf was gigantic, and while it did come in second place for DPS, I still stand by my word when I say this thing sucks. Don't use it. Now, I honestly expected a lot more out of both the Cerberus and the Sweet Bus, but they ended up a draw. I did miss a ton of crits with the Sweet Business, and I did have to re-proc Focus Fire with the Cerberus, but I still expected them to be more in line, if not better, than the Quicksilver. And to nobody's surprise, the Tommy's Matchbook absolutely smokes everything. It blew everything else out of the water. We caused 3 solar ignitions, which depending on your build can also provide an array of extra benefits. It also helps with ad clearing around the fat target, and it just schmelts. There's no other way to put it. And with that, we're going to move on to our final test in the Hydroponics Delta, so we can see how these autos do against tankier ads. Now, why the Hydroponics Delta? Well, as you can see here, the ads are twice as tanky as ads in raids, so it's about the equivalent of expert level content. Now we're going to take our top 4 contenders for a spin, starting off with a Sweet Bus. Now, out of everything we tested, why this one? Well, I'm a firm believer in the Sweet Business. And you got to remember that we're getting the Overload Auto Rifle mod, meaning it's assumed you're going to want to take an auto rifle into a Grandmaster Nightfall. And out of everything we tested today, which one would shine the most in a Grandmaster Nightfall? The good old Sweet Bus. Like I said before, this weapon is extremely controllable at long ranges, and that matters in a GM. What also matters is good damage output, which Sweet Business definitely has over something like the Kvastov or Necrochasm. Now, yes, the Tommy's Matchbook does hit harder, but it's not such a good idea to bring that into a GM since it does a lot of self-damage. It might be tough to survive even through the restoration. It is possible, and I'm sure some people will use it, but as far as a reliable overload killer goes, I don't think anything is topping the Sweet Business. So with that said, the Sweet Business gets my stamp of approval as the best auto rifle for GM and master content where overloads are present. But when it comes to the wider array of content below that GM and master difficulty, so that means raids, dungeons, etc., which auto rifle is the best? Well, let's move on to the Kvastov, and you'll see that it picks up that ad clear pace tenfold where the Sweet Business did not. Once again, we get that orb off of our kinetic siphon, the ads in your way will just magically disappear. It's kind of mind-blowing. Couple Eyes of Guardian shots will just delete a cluster of enemies like they weren't even there. It's so strong. I have a theory, and it could be wrong, so take it with a grain of salt, but you know how these ads are multiple times tankier than those ads we fought on Nessus in the earlier clips? Well, don't you think that our Eyes of Guardian ricochet shots should be doing less damage as well? Well, it feels like they're scaling to the content difficulty. It feels like they're still as strong as ever. These Shadow Legion Cabal with their overshields and phalanx shields have a lot of health, but they just get deleted by a couple ricochets. So it feels like the damage of it scales up, but I could be wrong. So the Kvastov is no joke. If your build can make orbs easily, then this gun will put in the work all the way up to Grandmasters. The only thing that has me saying that the Sweet Business is better is because of the single target DPS, but that don't mean the Kvastov ain't still viable. It can be gnarly when you get it going, but is it better than the Necrochasm? Let's find out. And those Cursed Thrall explosions seriously feel like they're scaling up with the difficulty too. It does so much damage. It's stupid. I'm telling you, when that thing procs, nothing around it lives. And hearing and watching it chain from target to target is just pure euphoria, especially in PvP. You ever see the hydraulic press channel or those world's most satisfying videos compilation? Well, this is that in Destiny form. There's no better feeling. And that tanky major in the middle of the room is not quite as tanky as Carl. I would say he's about half a Carl, but between One for Thrall and Desperation, we melt through that guy no problem. And the best part of this clip is that second room. You can see the Cursed Thrall explosions chain like crazy. It seriously is a thing of beauty. Now the Kvastov more or less did the same thing, just requiring an orb of power, but not requiring a crit, so there's a trade-off. The Cursed Thrall explosions give you more upfront damage than the Eyes of Guardian ricochets, and help you melt through fatter targets so they get caught in the crossfire. And the Necrochasm does more single target damage with One for Thrall and Desperation, but definitely fails when there are no ads around to proc your stuff. But on the other hand, so does the Kvastov. So at the end of the day, it's really up to you, but everything in me wants to say the Necrochasm is the better auto rifle for everything below master difficulty, and that's my final answer. But of course, we still gotta check out the Tommy's Matchbook one last time. Now, I'm not gonna show the Cerberus again, but like I said before, I do believe the Cerberus is gonna be the best auto rifle if you're using Devour. And once again, the Tommy's is by far the best auto rifle if you're on solar, the Necrochasm is the best otherwise, and the Sweet Business is the best for the toughest content. Those are my top 4 autos. There's not really one concrete answer, but there are different autos for different situations. So that's my answer. If you have conflicting opinions, feel free to discuss in the comments. And I did want to give a quick honorable mention to the Suros regime, which didn't make it into this video because that auto rifle really needs the new autoloader artifact mod in order to work. Because the Suros spins up its rate of fire when you hold down the trigger, but the mag is so small that it sucks. But since that new mod is going to auto-reload on final blows, you can keep that fast rate of fire going for a longer duration. I don't think it's going to be great, but I thought I'd at least mention it. And meanwhile, in the background gameplay, you can see how the Tommy melts through stuff, especially that Gladiator at the end. The Kvastov and Necrochasm had to mag dump on that guy to get the kill, but it's hilarious how the Tommy just obliterates him in 2 seconds. The Tommy seriously hits like a heavy weapon, and by the way, once upon a time I did a video to figure out which primary weapon did the most DPS, and Tommy's ended up doing the 3rd most DPS out of every primary in the game. But after we get this new artifact mod to give it a stacking damage bonus on final blows, and with the solar fulmination mod increasing the damage of ignitions, it might just be the highest DPS primary in the entire game. We might have to retest that for a future video. And that finally does it. That was a doozy, one of the longest videos I've made in a while. I was up until 4 in the morning working myself to death on this video, so if it helped you out, I would really appreciate it if you drop a like and a comment to boost the algorithm. It helps more than you know, and maybe even share it with a friend who you think might benefit from it. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here on this journey to 100K, and with that, I will catch you in the next video. See you later.